There are times in the course of the work that we're doing that I try to stop and really think about the mission that we're on together. That each one of us wakes up every day dedicated to the lifetime cause of making a difference in children's lives. It gets exhausting and frustrating, and few people know the countless hours we spend as educators just trying to do the right thing by those kids. We know that's not enough anymore to go to work, to keep your head down, and just do your job responsibilities. You have to be an advocate to be an educator. This is what it has to mean to be an educator in 2016. Because if being a teacher or a school nurse or a bus driver or a speech pathologist or any of the other irreplaceable jobs in schools means doing everything you can to help students learn better, then organizing and voting and knocking on doors and calling out elected officials when they're wrong, whether it's the governor or your school board, is part of your job responsibilities. The governor called us union thugs in August because we spoke up when he refused to release funding for our schools for the second year in a row, for a total of $93 million. He called us thugs because we have a strong voice that we use on behalf of our students. What we're doing today and tomorrow isn't being a thug. It's building stronger schools and a stronger profession. What we do in our classrooms isn't being a thug. It's building the future and our communities. Being involved in your union doesn't make you a thug. It's an extension, an amplification of the public service you do for the people of your community and state and country. So you all deserve a standing ovation for being here for your students. If you're proud of the work we do as educators, I want you to stand up and give yourselves a hand. If you're proud of the work we do as a union, I want you to stand up and applaud. And if you're proud to be a Maryland educator and a union thug, stand up and applaud. Okay, go ahead and take a seat. This isn't going to be the shortest speech, so I don't want you to have to stand for the whole thing. I'm kidding, I'm kidding. We'll see how it goes. Here's what I want you to think about during this speech, and then tonight when you go to sleep, and again tomorrow when you're driving home. Try to ask yourself these two questions. Number one, what power do I currently lack in doing what is best for my students? And number two, what am I willing to do to gain that power? What power do I currently lack in doing what's best for my students, and what am I willing to do to gain that power? The truth is, we are in a decades-long power struggle for who gets to decide what is best for our students. The academics and bureaucrats and politicians who sit in offices outside of school buildings and see students as data points on an achievement scale? Or the teachers and parents and support professionals who work and pick up their kids from school every day, who see them as human beings with all their anxieties and all their dreams. You are here because you're on the right side of that struggle, and you are fighting the good fight for your kids. Now that's overly simplistic. Teachers use data, and superintendents have worked in schools and know how kids learn. And everyone's best intention, no matter where they fall on the political spectrum, is for kids to have the best chance to get a strong education and have the training, credentials, and emotional intelligence necessary to have a sustainable career and a happy life. We are all capable of sitting around a table and finding common ground. but we have a very different philosophy on how to get there. And I lead with this because, quite frankly, too often that table doesn't exist. Too often the field is tilted against us in this power struggle. We see this when another layer of paperwork, another test, get mandated without asking educators if they'd help. We know it every time we open up the newspaper and our schools get talked about in terms of test scores instead of the innovative programs getting better results in so many of our buildings. And guess what, folks? We see the results of decisions made without educators. According to the Maryland State Department of Education, nearly half of all new educators in Maryland are leaving the profession in their first 3 years. That's not acceptable, and that's not the outcome we'd see if educators were driving more decisions. We need to advocate and fight for better support for our colleagues joining the profession. They will fill our seats here and educate our children and grandchildren. They deserve outstanding support. We know that the best education policy gets made when educators are at the table. And we need to do more to tilt the field back in our direction to make sure we always have the power to be at the table and have a strong voice there. You may have driven by Frederick Douglass's birthplace in Talbot County on your way down to Ocean City. And you may have heard his famous quote, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will." We need to tap into our power where it's always been and will always be, our numbers. Our potential power, matched with our unimpeachable credibility and mission as educators, can change the dynamic if we find a way to use them. We have 5 opportunities to change our standing in this power struggle. Here are the 5 fights for this school year and beyond. Number 1, implementing the Every Student Succeeds Act. Folks, this is our Wizard of Oz moment. The Wicked Witch, also known as No Child Left Behind, is dead. So what do we do now? Well, that's up to the states. And the state plan right now is up for grabs. It will determine how our schools are measured and what happens to low-performing schools for at least the next decades. Anything is on the table, from state-led charterization of Baltimore City to maintaining the same test and punish techniques of No Child Left Behind, to actually measuring schools based on the inputs we know make for really great schools. MSEA has been engaged, meeting with the State Board of Education, MSDE, and legislators on the subject. We're working to find common ground with school board leaders, superintendents, and other education advocates on what metrics we use to measure success and how to help schools improve instead of punishing them into more failure. What do you think of a system with a much smaller emphasis on test scores? What do you think of a system with a much greater emphasis on indicators like class size, on access to programs like pre-K and advanced coursework, on access to well-rounded curriculum, including arts and music, on school culture? What if we incentivize schools to have more staff focused on students' social and emotional health so they can navigate school and life and focus on the classroom? This is what increases opportunity for all students, no matter their zip code. It's how we begin to break down the test and punish culture that has boxed our public schools in for the last 15 years and beyond. And ultimately, whether our state school accountability plan looks like what I just described, or is another top-down, test-based, corporate reform-minded failure, is up to the people in this room. We can let it be up to superintendents, the state board, the governor, and the legislature, but wouldn't you rather we have a strong voice at the table? If several thousand activist educators raise their voices and demand change, that cannot be ignored. ESSA also plays a role in our second big fight, which is the need to reduce over-testing in our schools. While success in ESSA will mean less importance placed on testing, it also creates opportunities for us to reduce the time spent on testing. For example, the new federal law would pay for each of our districts to do an independent audit of its testing programs, providing a fair discussion for those districts in our state who are forming new district committees on assessments, as the recent State Testing Commission recommended and we pushed for. ESSA also allows districts to replace PARCC in high school grades with the SAT or ACT. Think of how that could curtail the complete disruption of our high schools that comes with PARCC. Perhaps most exciting of all, ESSA will allow states to apply for permission to pilot innovative assessments, things like portfolios and performance-based assessment, to replace PARCC except on a grade band basis. This could be a once-in-a-generation opportunity to prove that some other kind of standard statewide measurement, like teacher design tasks, could work better for our students. We need to find which districts are willing to try it and make sure that Maryland is one of the initial pilot states. Of course, we could take a huge step forward right now in reducing over-testing by passing a statewide safeguard that says every student should be ensured that of all the hours in each school year, 98% of them must be spent on instruction rather than district, state, or federally mandated tests. Excuse me. Now, we were successful in passing this unanimously in the House of Delegates last year, but the Senate wanted to wait for the Testing Commission to complete its work. The Testing Commission has made their recommendations, and the districts have chosen to ignore them in droves. This is about power. It's always been about power. And superintendents aren't going to give up their unilateral power to dictate testing without consulting teachers and support professionals. I have a crystal clear message for legislators. Charlie Barkley, I see you sitting there. It is time to be bold, and it is time to act. There is no more reason to wait another school year of 50 or 60 hours lost on standardized testing. We will pass a 2% cap on mandated testing this year in the General Assembly. And Charlie, I do thank you in the House for doing that last year. Our third fight for power is the fight for increased funding for our schools. And I mean real increases, not Governor Hogan's idea of record funding, which is his fancy way of saying he's following the increases mandated by state law to account for the increased attendance and inflation. How many of you remember when we passed the Thornton Bridge to Excellence Act? Raise your hands if you remember that. Oh, we need to educate some of the rest of these folks. Well, history is about to repeat itself. When Thornton was passed in the early 2000s, it was a national landmark for equity in state education funding. But over time, the percentage of our student body that is low income, special education, and ELL has spiked. In fact, the percentage of Maryland public school students living in poverty has more than doubled since 1990, from 22% to 45%, putting our statewide student population on the verge of becoming majority low income. Maryland now ranks near the bottom of all states for funding poor districts and affluent districts evenly, with federal education data showing that Maryland's poorest school districts receive 5% less state and local funding than Maryland's wealthiest districts. Last session, we worked with legislators to create a new Thornton Commission, this time called the Kirwan Commission, that will look at revamping our funding formula to make sure every school has more resources to fill their equity gaps. This isn't just about increasing funding. It's about spending in smart ways that we know as educators make a difference for kids. This funding must go towards finally making pre-K universal, lowering class sizes, dramatically expanding the number of community schools in our state, funding after-school programs, and yes, increasing both teacher and education support professionals' salaries. With new funding and a new opportunity-based accountability system through ESSA, our schools could be the best resources they've ever been for our kids. But winning that fight depends on us. Of course, we could have the best resources in the world for our schools, and we know it won't make a difference if we don't do a better job attracting and supporting the next generation of educators. Right now, far too many new educators leave the profession in their early years, increasing turnover and decreasing the quality of mentorship for future professionals. Our school systems simply do not do what it takes to keep great educators in the profession. Whether it's putting off agreed upon step increases, failing to invest in high quality mentors, or the lack of meaningful professional development and autonomy, it is now harder to come in and earn the respect needed to make this profession a lifelong career. That's why MSEA will be making mentoring and early career support a priority as our fourth fight. This summer, we had 4 fantastic members: Robin Beers from TAC, Hanak Hailu from MCEA, Jasmine Stewart from PGCEA, and Kyle DeJean from PGCEA, discuss with dozens of young educators from across Maryland how our association and state can do a better job of advocating for our newest members to make sure they feel supported and valued and stay in the profession. We are so grateful for their dedication to the profession and are developing local bargaining guidance and statewide advocacy opportunities around their recommendations and the feedback they gathered. Our fifth fight is very important to me. It's something we don't talk about often as an association, or really as a society. But it's starting to see the light of day in our national discourse. And that's the centuries-long path to erasing institutional racism from our communities. NEA has defined institutional racism as, quote, the societal patterns and practices that have the net effect of imposing oppressive conditions and denying rights, opportunity, and equality based on race, end quote. We have a moral obligation to take urgent action to address all levels of bias against those who are not white in our state and our country. I don't need to tell you about the disproportionality in resources that go to high minority versus low minority schools. You've seen it. I don't need to tell you about the disproportionality in disciplinary decisions. You've seen that too. And I don't need to tell you about the disproportionality in the retention rates of minority versus non-minority educators in expectations, in respect. Too often we have all seen that and more. So why us? To that question, I ask in return, who else? Who else besides those who shape the knowledge, norms, and emotional intelligence of each and every generation as they form opinions and views of the world around them? Who can achieve as much change for the better as us? As advocates, we aren't in this struggle alone, but we need to be in it. Each of the previous 4 fights involves a layer of combating institutional racism. It starts with educating ourselves and those around us and asking hard questions. What metrics do we use to measure the success of our schools? Which students see a disproportionate share of standardized testing? Is our funding of our schools equitable? Do white teachers and minority teachers get the same level of support and mentorship in this state? These are the questions that begin to crack the wall of institutional racism that has been built brick by complacency, acceptance, and fear. Just because we can't knock that wall down on our own, or maybe in the decades of our careers, doesn't mean we don't have an obligation to contribute a dent. We didn't build this wall on our own, and we can't knock it down that way either, but we have to do our part. I want you to take a look around this room. Remember how it feels to be in a group like this. The sheer power of our applause and our energy. If this group stood in front of the state capitol and demanded change, what would stop us? But the thing is, the hundreds of activists in this room, including you, don't even begin to scrape the surface of our power to win these 5 fights for our students. We have more than 72,000 members, and we have all the parents of our students and the leaders of the communities we build through our work in our schools. Our organizing potential is infinite, but it's up to us to make it real. There should be postcards on your tables. On the back, I want you to write down your commitment to take up one of the first 4 fights and bring 5 of your coworkers or neighbors or friends in on that effort. Then I want you to write how you're going to help dent the wall of institutional racism by taking this fight on. On the screen behind me, we have a sample card that will give you an idea of what we're looking for. The RA committee will come around and collect your cards. We'll share them with your locals and also share them back with you. We'll mail them to you right before the new year. Think of it as a friendly reminder and fodder for New Year's resolutions. But if we all keep these commitments, think about what we could accomplish. Think about how we cannot just tilt the field back in our direction, but take over the field on really big issues that affect our profession and our students. We just have to do our own part. This is how we transform our association and our schools for the better. Thank you, MSEA delegates. Let's make this happen.